Hi, thanks for being back with the Apologist bookshelf. Gary Zacharias here. This will be a third look at a book by Jonathan Morrow. It's called Think Christianly, subtitle Looking at the Intersection of Faith and Culture. I've already done a couple of podcasts. One was on just apologetics in general. Another one was on chapter 11 that dealt with truth and tolerance and relativism. And I wanted to look at chapters 16 and 17. We'll see if we make it that far. Chapter 16 is titled Christianity and the Public Square. And he starts off, and I think he makes a really good point, that there's a lot of confusion regarding Christian involvement in the public square. You know, should Christians engage in politics? Don't we have this idea of separation of church and state? And I think today we've got people who are concerned about Christian involvement, and they're calling it Christian nationalism, the idea that we want to turn the entire country into one big theocracy, you know, with God at its head and Jesus with him and all. So that's a whole separate issue, so I won't go down that road, but there is confusion about how involved should we be. So the first section that Morrow gets into is, he titles it What the Bible Says About Government and Political Engagement. He says, what is government for? He said, well, there are three purposes that seem to be in the Bible: maintaining public order, restraining human evil, and promoting the common good. And where is he getting this? Romans 13, the first 7 verses, Titus 3:1, and 1 Peter 2, verses 13 to 17. So we're supposed to pray for our leaders. We see that in 1 Timothy 2. We're supposed to obey them unless, that's a big unless, they command people to act unjustly or specifically to disobey God. We see that in Acts 5. Then he takes a look at Acts 16. He says in verses 35 to 38, we see the Apostle Paul. What's he doing? He's wielding his rights because he's a Roman citizen. He's doing it for the good of the gospel. I mean, we know that story. He's beaten. He's imprisoned with Silas. And he uses his political status as a Roman citizen. Why? So that he could get out and get the gospel spread more widely. He wasn't afraid to exercise the rights that were accorded him. He directly cited a violation of his rights. He didn't get due process, did he? He says we didn't get tried. So he's employing political leverage there to correct an injustice that was done to him and a fellow Christian. Now, we enjoy in this country, Morrow points out, far more rights as citizens than Paul ever did. Now, he says we ought to be following Paul's example to avail ourselves of its power in the appropriate circumstances, of course, for the good of our neighbors and to further the gospel. Well, here we go. Here's the big issue. Wait a minute. Isn't there a wall of separation between church and state? Yeah, that's a big one. Larry King, I don't know if anybody remembers him. He was a talk show host, and he invited James Dobson from Focus on the Family to come on his show to discuss Christianity and politics. So Dobson made a point, but King challenged him, saying, wait a minute, that would violate the separation of church and state. And Dobson responded, there's no such language in the Constitution. So King says, well, I got to look that up. Well, Dobson's correct. Jay Budziszewski, he's a professor of government at the University of Texas, has a good half a page here where he talks about that myth. He said, if you include even the amendments, the Constitution says only 3 things about religion. And here they are. Article 6 in the Constitution says, no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the U.S. Amendment 1 says this: Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So Budziszewski says, here's what this means. Number 1, the government can't make people take a religious test to qualify for holding an office. Number 2, Congress can't set up an official national church. Number 3, Congress can't stop people from practicing their religions. So Budziszewski says these 3 rules are to protect our liberty, to follow God, and not to abolish it. This idea of a wall of separation just isn't there. Christians can act freely according to their conviction in politics, just like atheists are. So where's this idea of a wall of separation come from? Morrow says it's actually from a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to a Baptist group back in 1802. It has no legal or constitutional authority in and of itself, even though it was cited later in a Supreme Court case. So the First Amendment's Establishment Clause, and that's a capital E and a capital C, only addresses the government. It says you got to hold off. You got to restrain your power when it comes to religion. So actually, according to the Constitution, we have freedom for religion, not freedom from religion, as some secularists argue. So I think that's good. Well, here's another myth that Morrow brings out. People say this, well, you shouldn't legislate your morality, especially Christians. Really. But as he points out, all laws, whether they prohibit you from doing something or allow you to do something, it's legislating morality. It's based on the idea that something is right and something is wrong, something is good or something is bad, that some things are better and other things are worse. So every time you set up a law, you're legislating somebody's morality. So I think that's really a good point. The law is undergirded, as he says, by moral and value judgments. So now let's pick up the next one, the idea, another myth, that the state is neutral. He says, contrary to public opinion, the state is not morally neutral. Why? Because it's the one that establishes laws. And after all, if you set up a law, in a sense, that's a teacher. The whole community looks at that law and says, oh, okay, I guess that's something good, so it's teaching us. So people, when they're forced to do something in a given situation, they're being taught a lesson. And the question is, are these good lessons? What do our laws teach concerning human nature and justice? If somebody came to this country from some other nation completely different than ours, what would they draw about what we really value when they look at our laws? See, those are good questions. He said there are really two competing visions today, talking about what is human life all about and what's the idea of the common good. So one view, and we're seeing this more and more, one view of the human race is that personal desire is what counts. The other is a perfectionist view that says human beings share the same nature by which we can know what sorts of goods and habits and all help the human being fulfill its proper end or perfection. See, that's really interesting, isn't it? That's a good point. It said, just take a look at something like pornography and the common good. Now, it does satisfy certain desires, but does it contribute to the flourishing of men and women and children? Should it be legal? Or what about the food we consume? We go to the doctor, there are certain standards for health. So if I deviate from those standards, I'm less healthy. Should the government be controlling things like that? So the next section he talks about is recovering prudence in politics. He says, you don't hear the word prudence much anymore. Yeah, exactly. Prudence is a virtue. Why? Because it aims at what is good. But he says pragmatism is just what works or what's useful, not what's good. So pragmatism is situational. Prudence is having a particular end in mind, something that's good and wise. So what would a prudent political strategy look like, he says? Well, it would focus on worthy goals. You know, what do you want to have as an end result? What kind of people do you want to have as a result of your laws? It will identify effective ways to get to these ends and how to use limited resources. See, that's a really good point. We don't have enough money to do everything. We don't have enough people to do everything. Resources are limited. So what's an effective way to achieve the ends that you think are good goals? Third point about a good political strategy, it would recognize the kind of world that we're in. It's a fallen world. So good luck with things like utopia, right? We're not going to get utopia here. And then fourth, what's another part of a prudent political strategy? To seek to preserve the possibility of future progress if you can't get it all right now. So that would be like the idea of compromise. So I think that's a really good point. He says evangelicals need to have prudence. We've got to balance zeal with knowledge, especially the obstacles that are out there and how we can overcome them. Political change comes slowly. We've got to be realistic. We can't just have a magic wand and make everything beautiful and wonderful. I have my students in my college class write a problem solution essay, and this whole issue comes up. If you have enough money, of course you could solve everything, maybe. If you had enough people involved, if you had enough resources, you could solve everything, but we don't. So we need a gradual, realistic explanation of what we can accomplish. So I think that's a really good point. He says the best way that we're going to live together agreeably, even if we have differences, we've got to have a robust sense of tolerance, or civility, we might call it. Well, just look around today. Think about American society today. Is tolerance there? No. It's funny to me because many people talk about being tolerant, but they mean agree with me and I will tolerate you. You disagree with me and I'm going to come after you. So really sad. But he can get back to moral here. So he says, from a Christian perspective, our goal is not to have a sacred public square in which only Christianity gets talked about and is preferred. And the goal is not a naked public square in which no ideas are even entertained. What we want is a civil public square. And so he quotes Os Guinness, and I really like Os Guinness a lot. He said, we want a civic public square in which everyone, people of all faiths, maybe we're no faiths, are equally free to enter and engage public life on the basis of their faith as a matter of that free exercise and being dictated by their own reason and conscience. But it's within the double framework of the Constitution and an agreed vision for the common good. Yeah, I think that's a really good point that he's bringing up there. He says, right now, though, we've got a tide of secularism really coming on strong. Said we've got to continue developing and presenting arguments based on natural law and common ground. In other words, secular arguments. I just think that's a really good point. After all, if our Christian worldview is true, if we think that we best understand the way people function and how they flourish, then we should build as big a tent as possible and speak the language of the audience we're trying to persuade. In other words, we can find common ground with atheists. We can find common ground with people of different religious beliefs. These connections will be starting points as we begin to show the failure and the problems of secularism, he points out. And he gives an example here, just when it comes to traditional to traditional marriage. He said you can talk economics about that. If natural marriage is devalued, then you're going to have a birth rate that declines. And if that happens, you got other problems. So then he has a section here about natural marriage versus same-sex marriage as an illustration of what he's talking about. So I wanted to get that, and we'll just end because I think this is going to be a long enough chapter. So his next section is making the case for natural marriage in the public square. So notice he could do all sorts of things. He could talk about transgenderism. He could talk about national defense, all sorts of things. But he's going to use this as a last section here to see how we discuss something that is a Christian perspective, but how do we do it in the public square? So he starts by saying, Time magazine in 2009 had a piece that was titled, Is There Hope for the American Marriage? And he said, the author says, there's no other single force causing as much measurable hardship and human misery in this country as the collapse of marriage. So he shows that this is the author of that piece in Time, he points out that the failure of marriage hurts children, it reduces mothers' financial security, it lands on the hardest on the nation's underclass. And so at the end of the essay, this is what the person says, the fundamental question we have to ask is this: what is the purpose of marriage? Is it birth control that we've got now? Is that going to play a role in it? Female equality? Do we want to just increase the pleasure of the adults who enter into it? Well, then marriage is going to disappear. But the author says, or is marriage an institution that sticks to its old intention and function to raise the next generation, to protect it and teach it, to give it the habits of conduct and character that will help that generation make a stronger society? So at the end, it says, what we teach about the true meaning of marriage will determine a great deal about our fate. Now, that's from Time magazine, he points out. So he says, our society is trying to ask, what's the purpose? What's the meaning of marriage? Well, He says the basic social purpose, that was before there was any state at all, any nation, is that it attaches mothers and fathers to their children and to each other. And he says basic justice for the children says they should be cared for. They should be connected to their parents. They brought them biologically and naturally brought them into being. So the state has a vested interest in this taking place for the good of society. Why? Because as a rule, long-term monogamous heterosexual unions by nature and as a group produce the next generation. So the natural institution of marriage is foundational for civilization to flourish. So he makes a really good point there. So that's something that we want people to agree with us on. I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it? He says, well, what's been happening lately? He said, no-fault divorce was introduced. Guess where? California. We've had the cultural impact of contraception. That's weakened natural marriage. Our culture's lost any sense that men and women are different. People are saying today gender is a social construction. Your sex is a biological function, but now men and women are interchangeable, even when it comes to parenting. No. A Rutgers sociologist says this: we should disavow the notion that mommies can make good daddies, just as we should disavow the popular notion of radical feminists that daddies can make good mommies. The two sexes are different to the core. This is that Rutgers sociologist. His name is David Popenoe, Popenoe, in case you want to look this up. Popenoe says the two sexes are different to the core, and each is necessary culturally and biologically for the optimal development of a human being. Okay, so that's good. It says if you legalize same-sex marriage, that's going to shake the traditional system and end up hurting the next generation. So he said, I'm not talking about being against gay people. He said the discussion is about being for natural marriage and the fact that it does public good. So he said, anytime you criticize homosexuality, that's seen as being homophobic. He said, well, if Christians are being hateful, then shame on them. But he said, making a case for strengthening marriage for the good of society is not hate speech. We can be opposed to same-sex marriage while at the same time treating people with dignity and respect. He says these things are not mutually exclusive. So I think that's a really good point. He said this chapter needs to come to an end, but he said, take a look at Frank Turek's short book called Correct, Not Politically Correct, How Same-Sex Marriage Hurts Everyone. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So that's Frank Turek, Turek, his book, Correct, Not Politically Correct. That is a good one. I had a chance to read that some time ago. Then as he begins to wrap up the chapter, Morrow has a New York Times article that talks about monogamy and same-sex marriage. And I think it's worth reading this, so hang with me here. A study to be released next month is offering a rare glimpse inside gay relationships and reveals that monogamy is not a central feature for many. Some gay men and lesbians argue that as a result, they have stronger, longer-lasting, and more honest relationships. They said that may sound counterintuitive, but some experts say boundary-challenging gay relationships represent an evolution in marriage, one that might point the way for the survival of the institution. So what's that saying? Gay men and lesbians don't care about stable monogamous relationships. So then we've got a problem, don't we? Morrow points out, once you redefine marriage, now it includes same-sex couples, why do you stop the new definition? You can keep on. You can't deny other forms of marriage, like incestuous, polygamous, group marriage. So he ends the chapter. He's talking, he's got a quote from Dr. Jennifer Roback Morse. And she highlights 4 fundamental principles about marriage that would be undermined by same-sex unions. Number 1, the biological basis for parenting. Number 2, the fact that children are ordinarily entitled to a relationship with both of their biological parents. Number 3, the fact that the state registers parenthood, it does not determine parenthood. Now it seems the state's getting involved in determining who qualifies as a parent. And then number 4, the fact that mothers and fathers are not interchangeable. They make distinct, unique, and important contributions to parenthood. So these are reasons, Morrow says, to be concerned about attempts at redefining marriage. we should bring it up, right? Being civil, of course, and being passionate about our position, but being civil at the same time. So at the end of the chapter here, he says, one thing is certain, someone will influence our society. Someone's going to be making laws. Someone will raise the topics for national and judicial and constitutional debate. So he says, why don't we labor faithfully and prudently as we can for the greatest good of others, and thus take on our role of salt and light? I think that's really a good point. He says we're going to have to also prepare to live as a minority in an increasingly post-Christian society. And that's true. I think that's true. But we've got truth on our side. We've got reality. And when we talk about what's the best for humans, what's the best way for them to flourish, we can bring in Christian perspectives because that is the best way. So that's Morrow's book here, Think Christianly. I like that a lot. As I end this podcast, I'd like you to consider a book called The Truth in True Crime. It's by J. Warner Wallace. And he goes through, I don't know, it was like 13, 14, or 15 ways that humans flourish. And he took this from all sorts of sociological studies, not Christian studies, secular studies. How does the human being flourish? And he shows how Christianity meets those needs best of any other worldview. So if you want to argue why you want to have certain things in our society, and people say, well, that's just your Christian perspective, our response is no, this is how people flourish. This is what makes for a successful person and a successful society. So J. Warner Wallace, his book, just wonderful book there. So anyway, I hope you're having a good day, and I thank you for being part of this podcast.